This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Vanity Fair by William Makepeace Thackeray. Chapter 53. A Rescue and a Catastrophe. Friend Rawdon drove on then to Mr. Moss's mansion in Cursitor Street and was duly inducted into that dismal place of hospitality. Morning was breaking over the cheerful housetops of Chancery Lane as the rattling cab woke up the echoes there. A little pink-eyed boy with a head as ruddy as the rising morn let the party into the house, and Rawdon was welcomed to the ground-floor apartments by Mr. Moss, his travelling companion and host, who cheerfully asked him if he would like a glass of something warm after his drive. The Colonel was not so depressed as some mortals would be, who, quitting a palace and a Plaquen's uxor, find themselves barred into a sponging-house. For if the truth must be told, he had been a lodger at Mr. Moss's establishment once or twice before. We've not thought it necessary, in the previous course of this narrative, to mention these trivial little domestic incidents, but the reader may be assured that they can't unfrequently occur in the life of a man who lives on nothing a year. Upon his first visit to Mr. Moss, the Colonel, then a bachelor, had been liberated by the generosity of his aunt. On the second mishap, little Becky, with the greatest spirit and kindness, had borrowed a sum of money from Lord Southdown, and had coaxed her husband's creditor, who was her shawl, velvet gown, lace pocket-handkerchief, trinket, and gimcrack purveyor, indeed, to take a portion of the sum claimed, and Rawdon's promissory note for the remainder. So on both these occasions the capture and release had been conducted with the utmost gallantry on all sides, and Moss and the Colonel were therefore on the very best of terms. "You'll find your old bed, Colonel, and everything comfortable," that gentleman said. "As I may honestly say, you may be pretty sure it's kep' aired, and by the best of company too. It was slep' in the night afore last by the Honourable Captain Famish of the 50th Dragoons, whose ma took him out after a fortnight, just to punish him, she said. But Lord bless you, I promise you, he punished my champagne, and had a party here every night. Regular tip-top swells down from the clubs in the West End. Captain Ragg, the Honourable Deuceace, who lives in the Temple, and some fellers as knows a good glass of wine, I warrant you. I've got a doctor of divinity upstairs, 5 gents in the coffee-room, and Mrs. Moss has a table d'hote at 5:30, and a little cards or music afterwards, when we shall be most happy to see you." "I'll ring when I want anything," said Rawdon, and went quietly to his bedroom. He was an old soldier, we have said, and not to be disturbed by any little shocks of fate. A weaker man would have sent off a letter to his wife on the instant of his capture. "But what is the use of disturbing her night's rest?" thought Rawdon. "She won't know whether I'm in my room or not. It will be time enough to write to her when she has had her sleep out, and I have had mine. It's only 170, and the deuce is in it if we can't raise that." And so, thinking about little Rawdon, whom he would not have know that he was in such a queer place, the Colonel turned into the bed lately occupied by Captain Famish, and fell asleep. It was 10 o'clock when he woke up, and the ruddy-headed youth brought him with conscious pride a fine silver dressing-case wherewith he might perform the operation of shaving. Indeed, Mr. Moss's house, though somewhat dirty, was splendid throughout. There were dirty trays and wine-coolers en permanence on the sideboard, huge dirty gilt cornices with dingy yellow satin hangings to the barred windows which looked into Cursitor Street, vast and dirty gilt picture frames surrounding pieces, sporting and sacred, all of which works were by the greatest masters, and fetched the greatest prices too, in the bill transactions, in the course of which they were sold and bought over and over again. The Colonel's breakfast was served to him in the same dingy and gorgeous plated ware. Miss Moss, a dark-eyed maid in curl-papers, appeared with the teapot, and, smiling, asked the Colonel how he had slept, and she brought him in the Morning Post with the names of all the great people who had figured at Lord Steyne's entertainment the night before. It contained a brilliant account of the festivities, and of the beautiful and accomplished Mrs. Rawdon Crawley's admirable personifications. After a lively chat with this lady, who sat on the edge of the breakfast table in an easy attitude, displaying the drapery of her stocking, and an ex-white satin shoe which was down at heel, Colonel Crawley called for pens and ink and paper, and being asked how many sheets, chose one which was brought to him between Miss Moss's own finger and thumb. Many a sheet had that dark-eyed damsel brought in. Many a poor fellow had scrawled and blotted hurried lines of entreaty, and paced up and down that awful room until his messenger brought back the reply. Poor men always use messengers instead of the post. Who has not had their letters with the wafers wet and the announcement that a person is waiting in the hall? Now, on the score of his application, Rawdon had not many misgivings. "Dear Becky," Rawdon wrote, "I hope you slept well. Don't be frightened if I don't bring you in your coffee. Last night, as I was coming home smoking, I met with an accident. I was nabbed by Moss of Cursitor Street, from whose gilt and splendid parlour I write this, the same that had me this time 2 years. Miss Moss brought in my tea. She is grown very fat, and as usual had her stockings down at heel. It's Nathan's business, 150, with costs 170. Please send me my desk and some cloths. I'm in pumps and a white tie, something like Miss M's stockings. I've 70 in it, and as soon as you get this, drive to Nathan's, offer him 75 down, and ask him to renew. Say I'll take wine. We may as well have some dinner sherry, but not pictures, they're too dear. If he won't stand it, take my ticker and such of your things as you can spare, and send them to Ball's. We must, of course, have the sum tonight. It won't do to let it stand over, as tomorrow's Sunday. The beds here are not very clean, and there may be other things out against me. I'm glad it ain't Rawdon's Saturday for coming home. God bless you. Yours in haste, R.C. P.S. Make haste and come." This letter, sealed with a wafer, was dispatched by one of the messengers who were always hanging about Mr. Moss's establishment, and Rawdon, having seen him depart, went out in the courtyard and smoked his cigar with a tolerably easy mind, in spite of the bars overhead, for Mr. Moss's courtyard is railed in like a cage, lest the gentlemen who are boarding with him should take a fancy to escape from his hospitality. 3 hours, he calculated, would be the utmost time required before Becky should arrive and open his prison doors, and he passed these pretty cheerfully in smoking, in reading the paper, and in the coffee-room with an acquaintance, Captain Walker, who happened to be there, and with whom he cut for sixpences for some hours, with pretty equal luck on either side. But the day passed away, and no messenger returned, no Becky. Mr. Moss's table d'hôte was served at the appointed hour of 5:30, when such of the gentlemen lodging in the house as could afford to pay for the banquet came and partook of it in the splendid front parlour before described, and with which Mr. Crawley's temporary lodging communicated, when Miss Hem, as her papa called her, appeared without the curl-papers of the morning, and Mrs. Hem did the honours of a prime boiled leg of mutton and turnips, of which the Colonel ate with a very